Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our event, Are EVs Bad for the Environment and Social Justice? My name is Rasha Abusita. I am the Sustainability Program Coordinator at Emerge Guelph, and I will be your host for today. First of all, I would like to thank everybody for joining us, and we will start with the Aboriginal land acknowledgement as usual. First of all, I want to acknowledge as we gather here, we are reminded that Guelph is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a community, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work, and a responsibility to foster reconciliation and respect for indigenous people who have been stewards and caretakers for this land for generations. Today, we acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples on whose traditional territory we are meeting today. And we encourage folks to continue educating themselves on all current issues facing First Nation communities and peoples across Ontario and Canada. And we should learn how to take action to uplift and support Indigenous people from coast to coast to coast. Thank you all. So, next, this is the agenda for today. And I would like to start with a little bit brief about climate change, what we do, and who we are. We are a not-for-profit organization that fights climate change. One way we do this is by helping the city towards achieving 100% renewable energy. And so far, the city has two climate goals. One of them is 100% renewable energy in 2050 for the corporation only. And the other one is net zero carbon in 2050 for the entire city of Guelph. And the city has previously acknowledged the climate change emergency, which is a good thing. And surprisingly, a few months ago, the city has passed the motion to demand the province to phase out fossil fuel burning for electricity. And this is a very good and positive thing to do, as we are joining forces with other cities and municipalities to take this action. So congratulations to Guelph and everybody here. And the city has recently released the Energy and Climate Change Report in September 2020, and the result shows a slight increase in the emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions from 2018 data. This increase is about 0.02%, and we can see that this is a very minimal increase, but this shows a very poor way of dealing with the climate change portfolio. And hence, our interpretation about the greenhouse gas emissions rising is, first of all, this is a very step backward. And number two, since we acknowledge the climate change emergency, we must have reduced the emissions before. It is evident that no serious action was made yet. And of course, we cannot wait until 2050 to start reducing the emissions and realize later that we missed the train or we realize that it's too late. So what do we do now, and how can we help the city to move forward and take actions? First of all, we have to review the target target of reducing the emissions. 2050 is far too late. This is what the science is telling us, and we must reevaluate the date and make it earlier, such as 2040. Number two is to develop the interim climate change target. Of course, one deadline is not enough to gauge our progress. Think about this like if we want to enroll our kindergarten child, do we ask the school to get us the report card year by year, or we wait till he grows up to grade 12 and then ask retroactively about the report card? The sooner we get the report card, the better we can correct and make changes or act to the progress. And of course, we must introduce interim target every 2 years minimum. This is a better way to know if we are moving forward or if we are not progressing. And number three, we have to entrench climate change action into the official plan. All decisions must have the climate change lens front and centered. And of course, when we take the decisions, we have always to ask ourselves, is this decision help us reach our climate change goals or target? And of course, through the implementation of any project or decision, we must also show that the decision is aligned with the climate targets. And this is by evidence, of course. And number 4, we have to empower the city staff to fight climate change every day. We must admit that we have a great staff working for us, but if we empower them and make them understand the challenges and the opportunities available, this can fast track the climate solution and help us save the time. And of course, we cannot delegate this to the small office in the city, as we can always help them and empower them to reach to the low-hanging fruits, and we can also make things happen. So enough about this. We are moving towards the announcement that we are having an upcoming event next in March. Wait to hear more news about who's going to be the climate change hero who travels 6,000 kilometers to commute to the office. So next week, we're going to reveal the name of the climate change hero. Stay tuned with us. And next, we are going to move towards our first 2 speakers, who are Karen Nelson and Patricia Bott from the University of Guelph. And just a little introduction about them. We have here, just a second, I have, Karen is the research shop coordinator at the University of Guelph. She trains and manages graduate students engaged in climate-engaged research projects with local community partners at the Community Engaged Scholarship Institute. Over the past 13 years, Karen has worked in both academic and community settings on research related to community health, housing, economic and rural development, and social services. And Patricia, she is a master's student in the Rural Planning and Development program in the School of Environmental Design. At the University of Guelph, she has worked as a research assistant with the research shop at the Community Engaged Scholarship Institute for the last 3 years. Please welcome with me both Karen and Patricia, as they are going to release the results of the EV report that was made in Guelph. Thank you. Over to you, Karen and Patricia.
All right, great, thank you. Can everyone hear me and see my screen?
Yep, looks good, Karen.
Okay, perfect. So hi, everybody. Patricia and I are very excited to be here today to present the results of a survey-based project that we conducted at the request of Emerge in August of 2020. So just a bit of an introduction. We are here from the research shop that's part of the Community Engaged Scholarship Institute at the University of Guelph. So my name is Karen and I manage the research shop. And with me, of course, is Patricia, who, as mentioned, is a graduate student in the Rural Planning and Development program and has been working at the research shop as a research assistant for over a year. I can't remember how long it's exactly been. A quick background on the research shop. So we work with local and regional organizations to carry out high impact research. Funded by our institute, we're able to hire students to conduct research at no cost for our community partners, while also training students in community engaged research. So in the spring of 2020, we were connected with Emerge to carry out a project of particular interest to them. So the purpose of this project was to better inform Emerge's initiatives that promote renewable energy technologies, and more specifically, electric vehicles. As part of this, and a big part of this, we really wanted to understand the perceived incentives and barriers to purchasing electric vehicles from the point of view of Guelph residents. I'll just quickly take you over how we did the project. We decided the easiest way to gain this information, especially given everything going on, was through surveys. So we worked with Emerge to create these surveys, which were distributed by Emerge across their network. So through webinars, newsletters, and the Guelph Today news outlet, just to name a few. In total, we were just shy of 300 members from the Guelph community who took the survey. The survey was split into 4 versions, depending on whether the respondent owned an EV or was interested in purchasing one in the future. So the 4 survey types were 1, own a new EV, so that was 70 respondents, own a used EV, that was 17 respondents, interested in purchasing an EV, that was 112 respondents, and not interested in purchasing or unsure, 100 respondents. All 4 versions collected demographic information, asked about interest in the environment and zero emission vehicles, as well as their thoughts on different benefits and barriers to electric vehicle ownership. Survey participants were asked to rank how much they agreed or disagreed that certain barriers and benefits that we found in the literature were concerns for them when purchasing or considering purchasing an electric vehicle. They were also provided with space to discuss their thoughts and open-ended questions. Just so to give you a high-level background of the results, I'm going to pass it over to Patricia.
Great, thank you, Karen. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Great. So overall, the findings of our research coincided with other studies we found in the literature around the benefits and barriers to accessing EVs. Our study offers a unique contribution by representing the perspectives of the Guelph community. When we looked across all 4 versions of the survey, we found that most participants did express strong interest in environmental issues. However, many participants who were unsure or not interested in EVs were concerned about the negative environmental impacts, and more specifically, the environmental impact of EV batteries. Of the barriers presented, some of the most prominent concerns raised by participants included opinions around the availability of financial incentives and concerns related to charging access and infrastructure. So now take a look at some of the more specific results of our study. In addition to better understanding the local views about barriers and benefits of EVs, in our survey, we also asked participants to rate their level of interest in environmental issues, such as the development of national energy resources, climate change, and energy infrastructure projects, as well as their interest in zero-emission vehicles. What we found was most of the participants across all 4 versions of the survey expressed strong interest or interest in environmental issues. In terms of zero-emission vehicles, EV owners and those who were interested in purchasing EVs were also interested in zero-emission vehicles. And perhaps unsurprisingly, those who identified as not being interested in EVs or were unsure about EVs expressed that they were unsure about the zero-emission vehicles, suggesting preference for alternative methods such as active or public transportation. So drawing on previous studies, we selected key benefits of EVs identified in the literature. Respondents were asked to rate the degree to which they agreed or disagreed that these factors were benefits to purchasing EVs when compared to gas-powered vehicles. Here we've highlighted opinions across 5 of these different factors. So when considering the reduction in required maintenance, most EV owners and those interested agreed or strongly agreed this was an advantage. For positive environmental impact, when the data was aggregated across all 4 versions of the surveys, participants agreed this was a benefit of EVs. However, as I alluded to earlier, there was a definite concern expressed about negative environmental impacts of EVs captured in the qualitative portion of the survey, which Karen will discuss in greater detail shortly. The look and style of EVs was considered a benefit by most EV owners as well. So looking at saving money over time compared to gas-powered vehicles, the majority of EV owners and those interested agreed this was a benefit. Investing in green companies as opposed to fossil fuels through the purchase of an EV was also considered a benefit by EV owners and those interested in buying an EV. So switching gears here slightly, taking a brief look at barriers. Great, thanks, Karen. Barriers to EV adoption. Here we highlighted our results across 5 different areas, starting with cost. Overall, we found across the 4 surveys, participants agreed that high initial cost of EVs was a concern for them. For example, owners who bought used pointed to the affordability when asked why they purchased a used vehicle over new. The lack of government incentives and rebates was also mentioned by many participants as a limiting factor for them. Those who were not interested in purchasing an EV also asserted that they believed that the high initial cost would not pay off over time. When asked about safety concerns, those who owned an EV and those who were interested in purchasing one disagreed that safety was an issue for them. And those who were not interested in purchasing the opinions were kind of mixed there. With regards to battery range, respondents across all 4 surveys agreed that the battery range was a concern for them. Among EV owners, these concerns are largely related to issues around charging when away from home, such as longer road trips. Looking at some more barriers. Related to charging time, another barrier was charging station availability away from home. Across all 4 surveys, most participants agreed that this was a concern for them. EVs owners expressed concerns over the lack of charging stations across Ontario, especially in more rural areas, and a lack of charging options in condos, on street level, at workplaces, and at hotels, for example. Participants who did not own EVs also expressed concerns around the high cost of fee-based charging stations. When asked around concerns about lack of model diversity, opinions were mixed here. Those who owned EVs and those who did not. When asked to expand upon this, respondents expressed that issues with model features such as power, space, reliable towing capacity, and lack of larger models to accommodate children or pets were some of the concerns. Battery replacement concerns were also expressed among EV owners, those specifically related to purchasing and not interested in purchasing. They're worried about battery degradation over time, the cost of eventual replacement, and negative environmental impact of their disposal. And lastly, those who did not own an EV discussed their concerns around potential negative environmental impacts. And I'll pass it over to Karen to discuss this a bit further.
All right, thanks, Patricia. So many participants who did not own an EV and were likely not interested in owning an EV brought up several concerns around social and environmental impacts. Before I go through these, just a very quick note that this is not by any means my area of specialty. So I'm not going to comment on whether or not these are real or perceived, but I'm going to just instead focus on presenting the results as we got them. So 10 of our participants indicated that they have no plans to purchase an electric vehicle due to environmental concerns. And several reasons were offered for this. So 2 respondents felt that owning a car, regardless of the type, will continue to harm the environment. So one in particular noted that issues surrounding traffic congestion will continue regardless, and felt that vehicles transporting single people is no longer an acceptable transportation option, regardless of what type of transportation that is. Another noted that EVs still encourage single-person car trips, which they cite as a problem in our current transportation system. And this person went on to note that too many vehicles on the road continues to create a dangerous situation for road users, and that the participant also felt that EVs would still contribute to emissions through tires and brakes. So many of these participants feel that EVs are not as green as most people think they are, specifically when you factor in the material to make them, as well as the manufacturing process. 2 participants noted that they would not buy an EV specifically for this reason. Both of these participants noted they would need to know that there would be a net zero impact on the environment, which includes the manufacturing for both the vehicles as well as the charging stations. 8 participants specifically mentioned the potential for negative environmental impacts from the batteries used in electric vehicles. 7 of those participants expressed concern around disposing of the batteries, including whether there is a way to recycle them or dispose of them safely. One participant commented, and I'm quoting, "If everyone purchased an electric vehicle, I could only imagine the extent of damage to the environment 20 years down the road when all those large batteries end up in the landfill." Another quote from a participant, "I would like clear information about the total embedded carbon footprint in battery developed and driven cars. I am of an opinion that purchasing a gas-driven car like a Fit may be as environmentally friendly as a hybrid or an electric car." 2 participants felt that the batteries were bad for the environment due to the mining practices and manufacturing. So one participant wrote that they are not as environmentally clean as people think. They take plastics to manufacture as well as precious metals and chemicals for batteries. Another participant wrote that the current mining practices have no regard for the destruction of the land. 5 participants brought up potential social impacts of EVs. Each of these 5 participants expressed concern over the labor issues in producing the batteries. And of those 5, 4 of them specifically referenced practices that result in enslaving children. 3 participants expressed that we should be moving away from cars regardless of its fuel or power source. So similar to what I mentioned in the beginning. All 3 of these participants noted they'd rather see improvements to public transit. One participant went on to express that they felt we need to drastically increase public transit infrastructure so that people do not have a need for a personal car at all. One wrote that they would like better bus routes and give up owning a car altogether. Another commented that electric vehicles are superior to fossil fuel-based vehicles, but even if we could mandate all future vehicles produced to be electric, this would not solve our environmental problems directly caused by transportation. And they went on to say, we need to drastically increase public mass transit infrastructure so the majority of people have no need or desire for a private personal vehicle at all. Finally, 2 people noted that the lack of sound from EVs can be a barrier. One participant mentioned that the lack of sound from vehicles can be dangerous, specifically to blind folks who rely on sound to travel safely. This participant wrote, and I'm quoting, I am blind and e-cars are creating more barriers for those of us who rely on the sound of an engine and traffic in order to safely travel throughout the city. The lack of sound coming from these vehicles is very dangerous, and I have come very close to being hit by one 2 times in recent months. I believe the barriers these cars are creating for the blind community is not being considered. Another noted that they had been surprised by electric bikes approaching quickly as they did not hear them coming, whereas a gas motor had an audible noise. And they mentioned the use of an alarm could help to alert pedestrians. So in summary, the findings in this project tend to align with what has been found in similar studies and what we found in our literature review. The 2 prominent issues of purchasing EVs are the financial incentives and charging access and infrastructure. And while the majority of participants did express strong interest in environmental issues, as just mentioned, many participants who were unsure or not interested in purchasing an EV were concerned about various environmental impacts and social impacts, specifically in reference to the batteries. So with that, that's a brief summary of our research. Thank you so much for allowing us to share it with you today, and I will pass it back over to, I'm not sure who's up next, somebody at Emerge.
Okay, I will hand the mic to Evan Ferrari, our Executive Director, to speak about the connection between EVs and the social justice. Over to you, Evan.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Patricia. That really helps to set the stage, I guess, for the rest of the evening. And I'm going to be dealing with another section, a part of the section specifically on the human rights side of things. But first, I want to point to our approach to transportation planning, and I think this is crucial before we even start talking about electric vehicles. At Emerge, we believe that we have to take a hierarchical approach to transportation, and this is your transportation masterclass in one slide. The size of the icon is indicative of how much effort society needs to give it from the standpoint of transportation. Active transportation, cycling and pedestrian active transportation is key in redeveloping our cities to make them more environmentally responsible, then an electrified public transit system, and ultimately an electrified private vehicle system. And I have to say that from the study that Patricia and Karen outlined, there were a lot of concerns about private vehicles. And we very reluctantly have put a lot of effort on the electric vehicle issue in Guelph specifically. It's not unlike other communities across the country. The reason we have is that there are over 8,000 new private vehicles that are purchased every year in Guelph. And our attitude is for every single one of them that we take off the road, and more importantly, that we convert to an electric vehicle, means that we can take between 3 and 4 tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere. Yes, there are other concerns, but we just want to make it clear that our approach, Emerge's approach, is very clear that this is the view that we take on things. Advance the slide here. One moment, please. That's interesting. So here we go. So on the human rights issue, I just want to make it very clear that we're not going to sugarcoat this one. There are issues here, and I will also say that this presentation that I'm making, this is the first time that I'm going to make it because we had to completely revamp it today. And the reason that we had to completely revamp it today was that literally today, Amnesty International just announced a new campaign that they call Powering Change, Principles for Businesses and Governments in the Battery Value Chain. And the reason that we bring attention to this is that late in the day yesterday, we became aware of the fact that this was about to be released. And we spent the better part of yesterday and today trying to get someone from Amnesty International to be able to give this presentation. So I'm doing it in a pinch. I'm no expert in this field, but if nothing else, we want to at least begin the discussion around this because we think there's some really key and important issues here. I'm not trying to represent Amnesty International. They were good enough to send me background documents that enabled me to put these slides together. I'm going to apologize before I start from the standpoint that I'm going to be breaking the cardinal rule and reading from a whole bunch of text on my slides. So bear with me, please. This new program, the new campaign that they're launching, not only in Canada, but around the world, they make it very clear that climate change is not only a great environmental emergency of our time, but also unprecedented from a human rights crisis. It threatens a wide range of human rights, including rights to water, to health, and to life itself. But here's the crux. Central to that shift is a massive increase in rechargeable batteries for EVs, electric vehicles, and renewable energy storage. Batteries that not that dissimilar from the types of batteries that we use every day in our phones, our laptops, cameras, tablets, all sorts of different appliances that we're using. And this risks the additional environmental harm and abuse of human rights, especially in the global south, which is already harmed by poverty, discrimination, vulnerable to the effects of climate change, despite their limited contribution to climate change, needless to say. But it doesn't need to be this way. And here's the crux of the issue that Amnesty is getting to with this. And there's specific demands, and I'm not going to go into any detail on them. I'm just going to sort of highlight them as we're flipping through the next few slides. And this is specifically the demands that we need to make on businesses. Number one, that they respect human rights and the environment, recognize the wide range of human rights that could be impacted, find solutions, and do not run away from the problem, be transparent, respect and work with affected communities and Indigenous people, respect the rights of workers. It needs to be regard for environmental and human rights, and businesses must conduct assessments of human rights, do not pay bribes, must tackle corruption, refuse minerals from the seabed, pursue resource efficient design, repair, reuse. This deals with many of the issues that both Karen and Patricia brought forward. Work towards maximum recycled content in batteries and safe design and recycling. Transition fully away from internal combustion engine, or ICE, as soon as possible. Support the rapid transition towards 100% renewable energy grid. So the first section was the specific demands on businesses, and the next one isn't that dissimilar from the first one, where it's incumbent on governments, on all governments around the world, to look at legally requiring businesses to respect human rights, and enforce regulations, enforce environmental protection laws, look at, investigate and respond to human rights, work jointly to address human rights and environmental risks, eliminate and penalize corruption, as I said, they're not that dissimilar than the ones that we had already seen earlier. And again, this is Amnesty International. They see the problems, but they also understand that these tools provide us with the opportunity to work towards that transition to 100% renewable energy grid. And that ultimately we need to require battery carbon footprint reporting instead of minimum thresholds. This isn't meant to be conclusive, or isn't necessarily a complete look at the human rights issues. Make it clear that there are human rights issues that are at play here. What's exciting about it is that Amnesty International now is pulling together a large number of civil society groups, both human rights and environmental organizations, to work together to tackle this very important issue. Rasha and I will be working in the weeks to come to see what other resources we can present to you on this issue. If in a least case scenario, what we'll do is, with our newsletter next week, we'll ensure that we have links to the most up-to-date information. And literally, they've just released all of this information today. So we're not going to spend much more time on that, on the human rights issue specifically, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware that we're not sugarcoating this. We don't want to give it just a glossing over. We want to put more emphasis on it, and more importantly, we want to be part of a solution to make sure that we can move that transition and do it in a way that doesn't harm people. Next, we're going to be looking at the environmental concerns regarding electric vehicles. And on that note, I want to introduce someone that I have to admit that I'm honored to consider a friend. I first met Paul Gipe almost 20 years ago, and I think it's really important for all of you to know Paul Gipe, because I suspect that quite a number of you in this audience tonight have benefited from the work of this man. Paul is a renewable energy analyst, but the reason that I say that many of you have benefited and probably will benefit in the future is Paul is one of the key architects of Ontario's Green Energy Act. Yes, he's in the United States. He's actually in Bakersfield, California, which is in Southern California. But Paul was brought in early on with the Toronto Renewable Energy Cooperative, and eventually worked with OSEA, the Ontario Sustainable Energy Association, to specifically work on developing the Green Energy Act. The feed-in tariff that many of you out there, I'm assuming if you've got in a residential situation, would have a microfit contract. You can thank Paul for that. He's had a profound impact on everything that's going on in Ontario when it comes to renewable energy. Some might say, well, you know what? The new government threw that out the window. We no longer have a Green Energy Act, but make no mistake, the impact that one act had in making a huge paradigm shift throughout North America, let alone in Ontario and in Canada, is still being affected today. Maybe not as much as we wanted it to, but what Paul started with this is quite profound. But what we're talking about today isn't specifically the Green Energy Act, but his expertise is so known in this field that in 2011, when Nissan was introducing the Nissan Leaf, that's not a Nissan Leaf there, by the way, that's his, he had a Nissan Leaf before. They went to Paul as one of the very early people to test it, to understand how is this going to work from the perspective of a new form of transportation. I could tell you about his academic background and the fact that he grew up in Indiana, not that far from Southern Ontario. But more importantly, what you want to know is that you want to know Paul, and I think at the end of the day, you want to thank him for what great benefits that he's brought to Ontario. Paul, I leave the podium over to you.
Thank you very much, Evan, and thank you for those stirring words. I should point out that that I need to thank all the people of Ontario for making it possible to accomplish what we did in Ontario. And I am now sharing my screen, and can you see my screen?
Not yet, Paul.
Okay, so I need to go back to the screen, and I need to share screen. Okay. All right, so now I need to VW. Okay. So, okay. Okay.
There we go.
Well, I'm not there yet, so.
We can see your slide view.
Right. Okay, so that's this is an interesting dilemma for me. Okay.
May I make a suggestion, Paul? If you hit the screen view in the lower left corner, it should work.
Okay, let me go back to that. Screen of view. Okay, well, I'm not even getting that now. So.
Yeah, extreme lower left.
Well, I'm not even getting, let's try this. Well, I'm not getting anything at the moment, so let me close out of this.
Stuff happens.
Yeah, stuff happens, and so what am I looking for now?
So we can see your screen view.
Yeah.
In the extreme lower left-hand corner, you can. Sorry, we're looking at your. We lost you there.
Yeah, I'm back now. So maybe you're going to need to bring up the presentation from your end.
Will do. Okay.
So while Evan is doing that, once again, I want to thank all the people in Ontario that work with me. You're the ones that made this possible, and not me. I was very happy to work with you, and I'm happy to share in the success that all of us made. Next. So Evan asked me to talk about are EVs bad? Next. And I said, Evan, what kind of question is that? Are CFLs bad? Are LEDs bad? Are vaccines bad? That's a topic today. Next. Because we have to remember that what we're talking about is offsetting oil. Oil is not a pretty picture. This is from 2014, just outside of Bakersfield. Bakersfield, Kern County. Next. You can go to the next. So what the purpose of this is, one is to offset oil production and oil consumption. And this is a view of Kern County, of Bakersfield, not far from where we live. This is actually the scenic view in Bakersfield. So this is what we're talking about here. We're trying to offset the environmental impacts from fossil fuel use and production. Next. So why drive electric? It's cleaner, it's safer, and if you've done it, you'll know it's a lot more fun. Next. So why drive electric? It uses fewer resources because it's much more efficient. Again, there's zero tailpipe emissions from the car. And overall, when you include the emissions from the power plants that provide the electricity, 50 to 80% fewer total emissions. And as I pointed out a moment ago, it keeps oil in the ground, which is the best place for oil. And they're fast and they're fun. Next. And we need to get rid of the SUVs. We need to get rid of internal combustion engine driven SUVs, or what we like to call in the EV community, gassers, because they're offsetting all the benefits, all this progress we're making in the move towards electric vehicles as people buy bigger and bigger SUVs. We're not getting anywhere. This could be one of the issues that you have there in the city of Guelph. Next. So we have to dump your SUVs. SUVs are the biggest new source of emissions of carbon dioxide from vehicles, and it's one of the largest growing sources of emissions from transportation vehicles. Next. So why drive electric? It's fewer emissions overall when you consider the entire generating mix. That trend is increasing, even in places like Ontario, which has closed its coal-fired power plants, and soon we hope to close your natural gas-fired power plants as well. Unfortunately, the trend increasing efficiency and emissions reductions in gasoline-powered vehicles is static. It's not improving. And so the trend is that we're moving towards electric vehicles because their trend of reduced emissions is increasing, not decreasing. Next. So there's no nitrogen oxide tailpipe emissions. And if you remember, the Dieselgate scandal was $35 billion US has so far cost Volkswagen in the diesel emission scandal, and also cost Canada as well. And if you can see from this in the US regulatory picture that the emissions from the Volkswagen Passat was 35 times the requirements in the US law. So Volkswagen NOx emissions, nitrogen oxide emissions, was far in excess of the legal requirements. And that's why they've paid so much and are still paying for it. Next. And if you look at the data from the Union of Concerned Scientists, electric vehicles have the lowest total CO2 emissions in comparison to gasoline-powered vehicles, because most of the emissions in a passenger vehicle, light-duty vehicle, come from the burning of fuel. It's not from the manufacturer of the car or of the batteries. It comes from the burning of the fuel. And in this example, this is a very pessimistic view. And I say that because they talk about 1 to 2 battery replacements for the life of the vehicle. And what we're seeing now is that's excessive. We are seeing now it's unlikely to have any battery replacements during the normal life of a battery electric vehicle. Next. If you look at the lifetime CO2 emissions, there's another study by MIT. This just came out just a few weeks ago, looking at the lifetime CO2 emissions. So that's from the production of the car, the production of the vehicle, production of the battery, and of course, the consumption of the fuel. Electric vehicles have the lowest lifetime CO2 emissions. This is done by another group. This is by MIT and not the Union of Concerned Scientists. Next. So let's look at EV CO2 emissions using the California generating mix. We still have some fossil-fired power plants in California, despite whatever hype we may have said about how green we are. We still have some fossil fuel power plants here, mostly natural gas. But if we move to a Chevy Bolt or to a Tesla Model 3 relative to gasoline-powered vehicles, that would cut our vehicle emissions by 80%. And where we live in Kern County in Bakersfield, California, is the San Joaquin Valley. It has the worst air pollution in the United States, worse than Los Angeles, worse than Houston. And it's primarily due to transportation. That is light duty vehicles and heavy duty trucks. Right now, we're just talking about light duty vehicles. Next. Next. Thanks. Thank you. So if we look at the Chevy Bolt's annual CO2 emissions by province in Canada, you can see that in many provinces in Canada, you do much better than we do in California, particularly if you look at Ontario. If you switched from gasoline-powered vehicles to a Chevy Bolt in Ontario, you would reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 97% because you have a lot of hydro capacity, you have a lot of nuclear capacity, and thank you, you have a lot of renewable energy capacity as well. Next. So why drive electric vehicles? Well, they're more efficient. Next. So if you look at the EV efficiency with the California generating mix, because that's what I have access to, the Chevy Bolt will consume about 1.7 liters per 100 kilometers, and the Tesla Model 3, which Glenn Estel has, Glenn's on this program tonight, I just saw his name pop up, is slightly better, but they're close. It's so around 1.6 to 1.7 liters per 100 kilometers. Next. Of gasoline efficiency equivalent. So if we look at the EV efficiency by the source of the electricity that we would use to power the electric vehicles, Of course, if you're using hydro, it's extremely low, and wind, it's extremely low, comparable that to hydro. Nuclear is also low. Those of us who are opposed to nuclear sometimes flinch at that, but that's also true. The actual air quality emissions from nuclear are fairly low, and solar and geothermal as well. But the emissions from fossil fuels are quite high. I mean, the efficiency, relative efficiency, if you use fossil fuels, is around 8 liters per 100 kilometers. Next. So why drive electric? EVs provide better value. So EVs are a lot like solar. They're higher upfront costs today. We think that they're going to reach parity probably next year, maybe the year after. But today they're more expensive than conventional vehicles, but you pay for the vehicle like solar upfront, but you gain long-term savings. So overall, it's less costly to own an electric vehicle than it is to own a gasser. Next. So they have lower operating costs because there's no engine, there's no oil changes, no spark plugs, no air filters. Now you do have to rotate the tires. I do admit that you do have to rotate the tires. And most importantly, EVs have lower fuel costs. Next. And this would be particularly true in places like Ontario, where we have a low cost of electricity, comparison to places like California. So we're looking at EVs would be the least cost in terms of the fuel to drive the vehicle of any of comparable vehicles out there today. Far cheaper than a gasoline powered vehicle and far cheaper than a diesel powered vehicle. Next. So here in California, the fuel for a Bolt would be 1/3 of that. The cost for fueling a Bolt, a Chevy Bolt here in California would be 1/3 of that of a Toyota Camry equivalent size vehicle. Next. And about 1/2 of the cost of maintaining that Camry in California, Chevy would be about 1/2 the cost of a Camry. So 1/3 the fuel cost and 1/2 that of the Camry. And that's why overall the costs are so much more attractive for an electric vehicle. Next. So why now? Well, we have better cars. We have much better batteries. We have longer range, typically 3 times what they were when we first started 7 years ago. More fast charging stations, both for Tesla vehicles and for non-Tesla vehicles. And you have hefty subsidies, unfortunately not in Ontario anymore because of Doug Ford, but you still do in Canada and British Columbia and Quebec. Next. And we have better cars. Now we're seeing cars being introduced, electric vehicles, trucks, SUVs, and sedans. Pickup trucks will be introduced this year. We now have SUVs, and of course sedans have been predominant so far. And like all other vehicles, one vehicle doesn't do it all. Sedan's not a pickup truck. Sedan is not an SUV. And so now the manufacturers are making different vehicles for different markets. Next. So when we look at EVs, we're talking about most important parameter, I think, for most people is the range of the EV. And I recommend for most of us here in North America, you need an EV with at least a 400-kilometer range. That's a Tesla, Chevy Bolt, Hyundai Kona, and so on, is about a 400-kilometer range. That means you could drive from Toronto to Tobermory and not have to charge. You would have to charge to return to Toronto, but you could drive from Toronto to Tobermory on one charge. Next. And the sales of electric vehicles are increasing dramatically. They're now exceeding that of hybrids, and certainly plug-in hybrids is passé. We don't recommend plug-in hybrids anymore, particularly what's happened in Europe. We see a lot of greenwashing with plug-in hybrids. Hybrids are, of course, a better choice than just a standard gasser. But if you really want to reduce your emissions, you want to improve the efficiency of the vehicle, you want to use resources better, you have to go to an battery electric vehicle, full battery electric vehicle. Next. So what to buy or lease? Next. So whatever EV should have, it must have the ability to fast charge, or what we call DC fast charge, so that if you're taking a road trip, and all of us do take a road trip in our vehicles periodically if we own one, will have to charge on the road someplace, and you want to do that as fast as possible. So that has to have a DC fast charge capability. Unfortunately, not all cars come that, all EVs come that way. Doesn't make any sense, I know, but that's the way it is. So you have to insist that if you're going to get an EV, it has to have fast charging capability. And particularly for you in Ontario, you need a heated steering wheel and heated seats. Now, I live in California. I'm pretty soft. I don't know if I could tolerate Ontario anymore, but we have heated seats and heated steering wheels for our EVs here in California. Next. This is an example of the charge port for a Chevy Bolt. It shows the DC port, that's for fast charging of the electric car. And then the AC port is how you would charge it at home. Next. So are EVs different? Well, yes, of course, they are different than gassers because you don't go to a gas station. You fill up at home. You charge your electric vehicle at home. Viva la différence. So there's no need to be afraid. They really do work. You can ask any of us who drive EVs, or once you get one, you'll understand why I say that. Next. So this is our consumption here in California. We practice what we preach. We practice energy conservation efficiency here at our home. We use about half the electricity of the typical Bakersfieldian or typical Californian. And with our electric vehicle, we consume now about 2,500 kilowatt hours extra per year to cover about 15,000 kilometers. And that puts us just right around the typical California consumption. So this is an example of how much electricity you would need. It's fairly easy to estimate how much electricity you would consume. And if you have a solar system on your home, how much more solar panels you would need to power your vehicle. Next. So how to drive EVs? Well, the normal driving, we charge at home. On a road trip, as I said, you charge at a DC fast charging station. Next. In the old days on road trips, even here in green California, we had to charge at what we call level 2 or slow speed charging stations. Sometimes at RV parks, we've seen a lot of California we would never seen of otherwise back in the early days. But those days are gone, and they're gone in Ontario and much of Canada as well. Next. So this is our EV home charging station. It has the EVSE, that's the charging box, and it has the plug. We have a switch to turn it on and off, and we also have an outlet in case a Tesla pulls up. Next. And this is the plug. It's the same throughout North America. Canada and United States uses the same plug. Different from a Tesla, of course. Teslas are always different, but this is the plug that all non-Tesla cars use to charge at home. Next. So in the fast charging, we have 3 standards in North America. We have Tesla, once again, different than everybody else. And all the others use 2 different systems. One's the Japanese system and one is the German and American system. Next. So for Teslas, like Glenn Estel's on the call today, 90% will be charged at home. Only charge on a road trip, so about 10% of the time we'll be charging on the road. And of course, the Tesla has a Supercharger Network, which is the most extensive in North America, bar none. It's absolutely outstanding what Tesla has done in terms of their charge network, and everybody else is trying to catch up with them. Next. So non-Tesla EVs, the same situation. 90% of your charging is done at home. This is what we did last year in our travels. About 10% of our charging was done on the road. 90% was done here at home. Next. So when we have a DC charging station, the station will include a number of kiosks. This kiosk is a dispenser which you plug into the car. Sometimes it has 2 cables, but you typically only use 1 cable at a time. Only 1 vehicle can charge at a time. Next. So this is a Supercharger Network, and you see that it extends into Canada. And this is a fairly old map, and Tesla is wisely expanding the network constantly. And so this network will expand further into Ontario and elsewhere in Canada. Next. So this is the regional charging network for non-Tesla vehicles and Tesla vehicles in Ontario and Quebec. And so you see it's fairly extensive, so certainly much more extensive than in the state of Maine. Next. And in the Western provinces, you can see there's a very extensive network, particularly in BC. BC's done a wonderful job of putting up DC fast charging stations. Next. And Electrify Canada, which is Volkswagen, as a part of their penance or their penalty for the Dieselgate scandal, is installing a network in Canada. It's pretty limited right now, but it's expanding, and that adds to the non-Tesla charging network in Canada. Next. So, and you have charge stations for non-Tesla. Tesla does it right. Tesla, you can go to charge stations, a couple of charge stations here in California where they have 40 different kiosks, 40 kiosks, 40 cars can charge at a time, sometimes even more. And they're building charge stations with even more than that. Very rare today to find one charging station. Next. Most of the time we'll find 2 non-Tesla charging stations. Next. Now we're beginning to see more 3 kiosk charging stations. This is a very encouraging trend. Next. And Electrify America, Electrify Canada installs typically 4 kiosks at each of their charging stations. And this is the trend, and this will be expanding further. Next. Very rare, though, you'll find 6 charging kiosks at a charging station. And that may be the future because as the population of electric vehicles increase, we need more DC fast charging stations on the road for people who want to take their cars on a trip. Again, that's only once or twice a year. So why drive electric? Well, it's the right thing to do. It's practice what we preach, and it's time to ditch the Prius and the SUV. Next. We must increase the deployment rate. The growth that we have is good, but it's not good enough, and we must accelerate the growth. And so what can be done? You can continue the federal subsidies you have in Canada, increase and expand the provincial subsidies, bring back the subsidies in Ontario, for example. And those of you who consider yourselves early adopters, will move now. There's no reason to wait. Next. And if you do, Ontario could save probably more than 300 lives per year. If that's important to you, converting the vehicle fleet in Ontario to 100% EVs will save 300 lives per year. Next. And that's particularly important if we reduce the air pollution emissions on high intensity transportation corridors, typically through low income areas. We can reduce the effects of electric transportation, light duty passenger vehicle transportation on communities that are live along highly trafficked routes in the inner city. Next. So it's time for Canadians and Ontarians in particular to take the road to the future. Next. It's no time to waffle, no time for half measures, and there's no time to lose. Next. And as Paul Scott, one of the star of Who Killed the Electric Car likes to say, no plug, no deal. If you're going to buy a car and it doesn't come with a plug, don't buy it. Only buy an EV. Next. So what's stopping you? Next. Thank you very much, Evan. Sorry for the problems. I just wanted to add while you're bringing up the rest of the panel. But what I tried to do with the program that I prepared on my machine was include a lot of photographs of places that we have traveled in an electric car, and places that are scenic. Certainly would be unusual landscapes for you in Ontario. For example, yesterday we drove 400 miles in an electric car, 200 to a place, and we took a 5-hour hike. And we drove 200 kilometers back to Bakersfield in an electric car. We use it like you would use any other vehicle, and we use it a lot. Thank you, Evan.
Thank you, Paul. That was brilliant. I really did appreciate that. I'm just going to ask the other speakers, Karen and Patricia, if you can join us, if you can unmute and turn your screens back on. And Paul, it never ceases to amaze me your knowledge of Ontario and Canada as a whole. It's very refreshing, and I think I really appreciate that. I'm just going to quickly go to Karen and Patricia. I'm curious if you have questions for Paul, and while you're asking questions, I'm just going to quickly look at the chat and see if I can't pull up specific questions there too. Karen or Patricia, do you have a question for Paul? Or Paul, do you have a question for one of them?
I guess I'd be interested to know, Paul, whether some of the data we found from our participants around the concerns of environmental impact, if that was shocking to you, if that's something you hear a lot. Yeah, just wondering about that.
Well, I live in Bakersfield in Kern County, California. And if you know anything about American politics, you know that our representative in the US Congress is Kevin McCarthy. That should tell you a lot about the area where I live. It's the reddest of the red counties in the blue state of California. So yes, I hear it a lot.
I'm finding an awful lot of discussion going on here. Interestingly enough, many of the questions seem to be responded to by other people in the message board as well. There were some discussions around actually, I see Paul, I see Glenn responding to the issue of brakes. Paul, why don't you explain the regenerative braking piece of it? I see that Glenn is responding to that. Some people had concerns about the brakes themselves, and maybe even touch on the issue of one pedal driving and what that means for people as well.
Okay, well that's an excellent question, and I did not set Evan up for that. But if you drive an electric vehicle, if you get an electric vehicle and you drive an electric vehicle, and you drive it with one pedal, that is, you use the accelerator pedal to go forward and to slow down, you'll realize that that's the way cars were intended to be. If you're not going to walk, you're not going to bicycle, and you're not going to take public transportation, and you have a private vehicle, you'll realize that that's the way cars should have been designed, or probably would have been designed if they could have. And the way regenerative braking works is as if you want to slow down, you let your foot off the accelerator, or we say the go pedal. It's no longer the gas pedal. But you let your foot off the accelerator, and the wheels begin to drive the motor as an electric generator, and the electricity that is created goes back into the battery. Now, you never get 100% of the energy out of the wheels as you put into them, but you can get quite a bit. You can get about 2/3 of the energy that you spent moving the car forward in regenerative braking. So if you're going down a steep mountain, like we have here in California, I mean, you'd have to go a ways in Ontario to find this, but as we do here in California, you can go down a mountain and you can watch your kilowatt hour meter go up instead of going down, even though you're driving 50 miles an hour.
Thanks, Paul. One of the best descriptions that I had of one pedal driving, right? I remember trying to explain one pedal driving to people, and I was doing a really poor job of it. But what I found that the best way of communicating it was to say, if you've ever driven a go-kart, as soon as you take your foot off the gas, or as soon as you take your foot off the accelerator, it comes to a complete stop. So with EVs, with one pedal driving, imagine the same thing. If you quickly take your foot off the accelerator in an EV with one pedal driving, it will come to a complete stop. I think the first half a dozen times that I used one, I just about put everybody through the windshield that was in the car at the same time. But you get used to it. And what Paul is saying is that automatically that regenerative braking is occurring in there.
That's
I'm going to go back to the chat. Go ahead, Paul.
It will bring you to a stop. We drive our Bolt with the setting, so that it will bring the car to a stop. Now here in Bakersfield, because the way we have traffic here in this part of California, when I'm at a stop, I always do put my foot on the brake pedal so the lights are illuminated in the back, just to make sure those yo-yos with the gun racks don't run into me. But just another thing that comes up frequently about the regenerative braking is when you release your foot off the gas pedal, the go pedal, the accelerator pedal, and the regenerative braking begins to produce electricity, the tail lights will come on. And actually, so for example, if you drove a car with a stick shift, many of us, our generation drove cars with stick shifts, when you downshifted, the brakes lights did not come on. So this is actually much better than a gasoline powered car with a stick shift because the brake lights did not illuminate. But with a car that's an electric car that has regenerative braking, of course, everything's run by a computer. And as soon as you let your foot off the accelerator pedal, the brake lights come on to alert the people behind you that you're slowing down.
That's a great point. Steve Jacobs brought up the issue of portable storage, or at least I'm paraphrasing here, and the concept of using EVs as storage, and also I use the term very lightly because I don't understand it, but the implications of blockchain and how that will change the way that we use electricity, whether you have solar panels and you store your electricity into my car, I sell it back to the grid, or I sell it back to you or someone else along the way. But this multi-directional flow of electricity. Do you want to touch on that one briefly, Paul?
Well, I'm not going to touch on blockchain because I have no idea what it is. It's a little too trendy for me. I'm sort of too straight-laced for something like that. But I can comment on the idea of wheels to grid. That is, we have this big battery, 60 kilowatt hour battery is, I would say, the minimum now for a passenger vehicle. And if you need electricity on the system, for example, Ontario Hydro or whatever they call themselves now, says that we will pay a lot for the electricity. You can feed the electricity back, or there's an emergency, you can feed the electricity back, or in a rare case where you have the kind of switching on your electrical service to Ontario Hydro. I don't even know if they'll let you do this in Ontario, but you could, when a power outage, say up there on near Tobermory, for example, where Glen Estel lives, if the power lines go down, you could use that battery to power your house instead of buying a whole bunch of batteries just for your house. There are places where this is being done, but it's still just a demonstration phase. It's not something that's widespread. But of course, you're all aware that the Tesla Powerwalls, that's a product, that's a technology that comes from the car. It's the same kinds of batteries, and they're putting them on a wall. And so the idea is, of course, you just use the car instead of putting these things on a wall. But then, of course, if you use electricity in the battery, you can't drive anywhere. So, you know, it takes a computer, and you have to make choices about how much of this electricity you want to use. I did want to touch on something that Karen and Patricia talked about in the question, the comments. The reservations about electric vehicles was about the disposal of batteries. And I just wanted to point out, you don't dispose batteries. We don't dispose of batteries now because they're so dangerous and so deadly. And we don't dispose of electric vehicle batteries now, and we won't in the future because they're so viable, we will reuse them. And right now, to my knowledge, there's 3 companies in the world that are recycling, reusing electric vehicle batteries. Tesla, well, Tesla not itself, but a spinoff from Tesla. JB Straubel is starting a company to recycle electric vehicle batteries. Volkswagen's building a plant to recycle batteries that they're using. And there's another German company that's doing it as a business right now. So just in terms of the language that we use, we don't want to dispose of electric vehicle batteries, period.
And Paul, would you mind just touching on the issue of recycling versus repurposing? Because I think there's this whole aftermarket of repurposing electric vehicle batteries for home use as backup systems and yeah.
Okay, well, first of all, for example, you have this big battery, and so after 10 years, the car wears out, but the battery is still good. So we've used the battery just like the battery that's in your phone, is used, but it still has capacity in it. So we can take the battery out of the car, say it's got 60% of the battery left. I just did a calculation for the Chevy Bolt that we had for 3 years and what it would have after 100,000 miles. Can't remember it exactly, but it'd be like 75% of its capacity after 100,000 miles. The car would be gone, but the battery would still be useful. You could take that out and you could put it in your home, for example. You could put it in stationary uses. For example, Ontario Hydro could put a whole bunch of these things together to store electricity from the wind turbines and solar panels that you have in Ontario. So when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, you have the storage in the batteries. And there are the kind of applications I've mentioned previously. BMW is an auto manufacturer in Germany, and they make an electric car. They took a bunch of their batteries that were used and they put them in a power plant at their factory. So that's their wheels to grid. That's not a car, but they took the batteries out and put them into a mini power plant at their factory. And there's several applications like that around the world. Not sure how big that's going to be, but that's a possibility.
There was a question there from Tanya, I believe, just about, are these technologies available today? And frankly, they are in different formats. The most formal one, I guess, would be the Tesla. The Tesla Powerwall. I was involved with an installation of a solar system that was a photovoltaic system powering a battery system that would power things in the homes unless the batteries got too low, and then the grid would wind up topping up the battery. So and this was more than 10 years ago when the technology and the software was a fraction of what it is today. And what I'll also say, Paul, you mentioned the implication of running your house from your car. And I had a very interesting conversation from a gentleman who was the president of a municipal electric utility just east of Toronto. I'm afraid I don't remember which one of the communities east of Toronto. And he had a Mitsubishi, is it the Highlander? I get that mixed up. There's they have a plug-in hybrid.
Yeah, that's a Highlander. Highlander is the plug-in hybrid.
Right,
yeah.
And he purposely tested it on his home to run his house with the Highlander. Now it is a plug-in hybrid. I know they're not our favorites. Either our SUVs when it comes down to it, or trucks. But here's a guy who clearly has an electrical engineering background, but he said it wasn't a big deal for him to set it up. So in the event of catastrophic failure, that he was able to do that with that system. So it's not like this stuff is 10 and 15 years away. The technology, especially the software side of it, is changing very quickly.
I would say it's less of a technical problem, be more of a regulatory, and particularly Ontario, because I have a little bit of experience in Ontario dealing with the regulatory system with Ontario Hydro. Would probably be that would probably take more time than the actual technology itself. I wanted to go back to Karen and Patricia's presentation about one of the concerns about electric vehicles, about the mining of materials for the batteries, manufacturing batteries, of course, manufacturing an electric car. And part of what I would like to see happen is to bring manufacturing home, bring mining home. Now, Canada, of course, Ontario, you have a lot of nickel mining. Well, you have nickel mining in Sudbury. In Ontario, we don't have that in California, but so you're already doing some of that. And of course, you have lithium deposits in Ontario, and you have cobalt deposits. So, and I like to think that Canada has better environmental practices than some other countries in the world, probably better than some of us US states too. But I would like to bring manufacturing home, one, to create jobs for us North Americans, because we need jobs. When we have a lot of unemployed people, you can see what happens politically, like down here in the United States. And so we do need to create jobs for our own people here in North America, but we also need to bring the mining home, rather than outsourcing the environmental impacts of our consumptive lifestyles. We need to bring those activities home so that we can watch them, we can monitor them, we can critique them, we can shut them down if they're not doing a good job. And though we may all disagree about Elon Musk, he does do some interesting things. And one of the things he's trying to do is lithium mining in the United States. And I think that's a good thing. It's not going to be a good thing for the earth where they're going to do it, but it's a good thing overall in that they're bringing the mining activity back to the United States where we can monitor it. We may let them get away with murder just like we do with the oil industry, but at least it's ours and we're responsible for it.
Very good points. And I just want to make note that two people, Bruce Wilson and Glenn Gary, pointed out, I mentioned the Highlander. The Highlander is a Toyota. The Mitsubishi is an Outlander. So they both have "ander" at the end of it. That's why we got them confused. Thanks, guys, for pointing that out. Well, I think we're coming close to the end of our questions, Paul. What sage advice, let me ask you this question. What sage advice do you leave with people that are after your best efforts and you haven't quite convinced them yet? What's the last thing that you leave them with before you end a conversation with them about EVs, about why they need to do this? You've given us all the in-depth reasons, but what's your last word?
Drive one. They're addictive. And I admit it, we've been in COVID now for almost a year, and every week, one day a week, we take a day off and we go someplace. And we hike or do something scenic, go some scenic place. But part of it is we go out in the electric car and we take a road trip in the electric car. And just to let people know, where we go, there's no public transportation. I mean, this is the United States, this is California. There's no public transportation. And you certainly can't walk there. We walk when we get there, but we can't walk there. So I typically say, well, forget everything else, just drive it. And don't necessarily just drive it at the car dealers. I don't recommend people go to car dealers. I think you have in Ontario Plug and Drive, they probably offer driving. Maybe you can rent a car for a couple of days or something like that. And do that. Just don't drive it off the car dealer's lot. That's not enough. You got to kind of get used to it. Like Evan said, when you let that regenerative braking goes on and you start throwing towards the windshield, you say, whoa. and you need to know that if you push the accelerator pedal down, it really will go. And the Chevy Bolt, I mean, it's a Chevy, of course, and you have a Chevrolet, you have General Motors plant in Ontario. It will squeal the tires. And so we live in a place where there are lots of big trucks, really, really big trucks with big pipes, kind of the trucks with big pipes that like to blow out the black smoke if they see a Prius. And they'll be revving their engines at the stoplight. And I squeal my tires and I beat them to the next light. They don't like that. That's not a safe thing to do in this part of the world. But anyway, it's fun once in a while.
The 18-year-old in you is coming out, Paul. Definitely coming out. And I have to share a similar story with a mutual friend of ours, with Mike Brigham. He had one of the first Bolts that were in the country, and I was taking it for a spin with him, and he said, punch it, just see what it does. I hate to say this, but I was doing 80 kilometers an hour on Woolwich before I knew it. And not only was it burning rubber, there was smoke coming out of the tires. I was absolutely, the 18-year-old in me really loved that, I must say. Well, Karen and Patricia, thank you very much for all the work that you did in the research. We really appreciated that you were able to put a very local lens on the barriers to entry of it. And Paul, I'm going to leave the final words to Rasha. Rasha, if you want to come back on, I guess you're going to have to get off mute there and come back on screen. There you go, Rasha.
Yeah, sure. Thank you all for your nice discussion. Okay, so with this, we reached to the end of our event. Thank you all for your attendance. And also, I hope that you feel positive to ditch your gas engine now. Don't hesitate to reach to us if you want a copy of any of the resources. And with this, I must also thank our guest speakers, Paul Gipe from California Windworks, and also both of the speakers from the University of Guelph, Karen and Patricia. And of course, we would like to thank our sponsor, Buddy Colin. Thanks everyone for sticking around, and have a very good night. Thank you all for attendance. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Au revoir.
Yeah.